Let's jump right into this explainer by imagining a pretty wild scenario. Picture waking up tomorrow morning and there's just an ancient human standing right there in your bedroom. No, they aren't attacking you, they're just silently watching your routine. It's a really fun thought experiment, right? Because it forces us to look at our totally normal, everyday lives through a completely prehistoric lens.
So, right off the bat, this ancient guest has been awake for 10 seconds? And they're already deeply concerned. First, they watch a tiny machine beside your bed start literally screaming at you. Then they watch you physically slap it to make it stop. And then, before you even stand up, you immediately grab a glowing rectangle and just stare into it. I mean, to them, this is completely unhinged behavior.
And this perfectly illustrates our first huge contrast. You see, ancient mornings were intrinsically tied to the sun. The sunrise was the literal start of survival. But our mornings, well, they're completely dictated by commands. A sound commands you to wake up, a screen dictates what you missed while you were unconscious, a calendar tells you where you have to be, and a clock basically just tells you that you're already late.
Which brings us to Section 1, the commute, sitting in moving boxes.
So your ancient guest follows you outside. Now remember, for basically all of human history, movement was an exercise. It was literally just survival, hunting, gathering, finding water. But today, the ancient human watches you sit down, stand up, leave your home, and then sit back down inside a moving box. And looking around, there are hundreds of other humans doing the exact same thing. Nobody is tracking or hunting. Everybody's just sitting there, waiting for their boxes to move.
And that leads us to Section 2, abstract work, invisible numbers.
You finally get to work, sit in yet another chair, and start staring at a glowing board. Picture the ancient human leaning over your shoulder, whispering, "So, what are you making?" And you have to look them in the eye and say, mostly emails." The funny thing is, neither of you actually understands that answer. Try explaining that your machine sends invisible signals, which move invisible numbers, which somehow decide if you're allowed to keep living inside a room. Honestly, at this exact moment, your guest is probably considering just running back to the forest.
Now, to put that into perspective, think about how ancient work actually functioned. Yeah, it was brutally hard, no doubt about it, but look at what they were doing. Securing food, fire, water, shelter, tools, safety. Literally every single ounce of effort had a direct, totally visible connection to staying alive. You knew exactly what your sweat produced every single day.
Compare that to what we get out of modern work. Sure, collectively, modern labor builds incredible things like massive cities, cutting-edge medicine, and clean water. But on an individual level, it's incredibly abstract. You can work hard all day and at the end of it have absolutely nothing physical in your hands to prove you did anything. You're just left with a tired brain, a sore lower back, and 47 unread messages marked urgent by people who are honestly probably just as confused as you are.
Let's move on to Section 3, modern sustenance, the magic trap. So, lunchtime rolls around and we head to a cornerstone of modern survival, the supermarket. Just imagine the absolute oddities they'd see here. They'd see fruit completely out of season, meat that nobody had to hunt for, bread that somehow survives longer than some of our relationships, and drinks that are way brighter than any berry found in nature. And of course, entire aisles dedicated to tiny bags full of orange dust triangles. They wouldn't necessarily judge it or say it's bad. They just look around in awe and ask, why on earth is all of this here? The crucial takeaway here is that ancient food was deeply rooted in reality. It was connected to a specific place, a season, a required skill, and almost always a risk. Modern food, though, just arrives as a detached product. To an ancient mind, walking through our supermarket might not actually look like abundance. It might just look like food that completely forgot where it came from. All right, Section 4, the exercise paradox, movement as a choice. The workday finally ends, and you head off to the gym. Let's examine this ritual through their eyes for a second. They watch you intentionally pick up incredibly heavy objects that have absolutely no practical reason to be moved. They watch you sprint on a machine that literally goes nowhere. And the cherry on top? A tiny computer on your wrist vibrates to congratulate you for pretending to travel. At this point, they aren't just confused. They are legitimately worried about your sanity. And this perfectly captures the paradox we live in. We built a world where walking no longer has a survival destination. We essentially made movement totally optional in our daily routines. So because of that, we had to artificially invent exercise just to inject that movement back into our lives so our bodies wouldn't literally fall apart.
Moving right along to Section 5, crowds without community. Alone in the crowd.
So, You head home deeply exhausted. Not from running from wolves, mind you, but exhausted nonetheless. You walk into a giant building stacked with dozens of homes and hundreds of people. Now, for ancient humans, life basically meant being constantly close to a visible tribe, sharing space, warmth, and facing danger together. Yet, in our modern apartment buildings, you're literally surrounded by people, above you, below you, behind every single wall, and yet, you probably know almost none of their names.
To an ancient human, this whole dynamic is deeply, deeply worrying. We've somehow managed to create connection without physical presence and friendship through panes of glass. We literally live in crowds without community. To them, the whole concept of passing hundreds of humans on the street in a single day and speaking to absolutely none of them, or living in a massive building full of complete strangers, would be incredibly hard to wrap their heads around.
Which brings us to Section 6, the negotiation of sleep, not just rest. Night finally falls. You've spent the entire day totally exhausted from sitting. And then at night, instead of, actually sleeping, you tell yourself, man, I really need to get some sleep, while continuing to stare directly into the exact same glowing rectangle that exhausted you in the first place. The ancient human just sits there watching you scroll and scroll and scroll until they are absolutely convinced that this rectangle is some sort of cursed object stealing your soul. And honestly, they kind of have a point. Just look at the wildly bizarre solutions we've had to invent. We made our nights brighter with artificial light, so then we had to go buy blackout curtains. We made our rooms perfectly quiet, so then we had to download apps that play fake rain sounds. We built massive insulated walls to escape the weather, and now we literally pay money to go sleep outside in a tent. We solved ancient problems, but in the process, we created these highly weird solutions just to cope with our own comforts.
Let's hit Section 7, the comfortable modern trap, a double-edged sword.
Look, if an ancient human actually followed you around all day, they'd undoubtedly be blown away by our medicine and our endless supply of clean water. But at the end of the day, we are fundamentally the exact same strange animal as them. We're just living in entirely different cages. Ancient life was, without a doubt, harder and way more dangerous, but it was also deeply connected. Modern life is undeniably safer, but our comfort has made us all strangely anxious and lonely. We live in a world where food is absolutely everywhere, yet we constantly stress over diets. Where our shelter is virtually impenetrable, yet we constantly feel unsafe.
Seeing your screaming alarm clock, your treadmill going nowhere, your totally abstract, unread emails, and your glowing phone keeping you awake at midnight, they probably wouldn't look around and say, wow, the future is amazing. They would likely look at you completely baffled and ask, why did you choose to live this way?
And then, after a very long, very contemplative silence, they'd probably ask if those orange dust triangles are actually edible. I mean, fair question, but more importantly, their silent observation leaves us with a really profound takeaway for this explainer. If our bodies and our brains are still hardwired for the ancient world, how much of our modern anxiety, our exhaustion, and our loneliness is simply an evolutionary mismatch? Just something to think about the next time your alarm clock starts screaming at you tomorrow morning. What small, ancient habits could you maybe bring back into your modern cage today?